Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk a little bit about some strategies for supporting social skills and peer conflict. We're joined by Dr. Stephanie Schreiber and Dr. Kate Helbig. This work is being supported by the Munroe-Meyer Guild. And this is a series that we are offering in collaboration with the School-Based Mental Health Collaborative, which is a collaborative that serves the Omaha metro area in Nebraska, really aiming just to refine and improve school-based mental health systems. And this is our last presentation of the series. Please welcome our awesome presenters. We're joined here with Stephanie Schreiber. Stephanie Schreiber, or Dr. Stephanie Schreiber, is a licensed psychologist at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City. She spends her time conducting evaluations for autism and related disabilities and providing behavioral consultation for parents to address challenging behaviors. We're also joined by Dr. Kate Helbig, who is an assistant professor in the school psychology program at the University of South Dakota. Dr. Helbig specializes in behavioral interventions and social skills teaching for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Caitlin Young. We are really excited to be here. Kate and I have been doing social skills work for quite a while now, since we were back in graduate school, doing research, social skills groups, all kinds of fun stuff. And so we're really passionate about this topic, something that we've been doing for a while. And we really want to find, some really good evidence-based strategies for you to implement at home. We know that finding social skills groups, resources can be kind of tough, especially for parents. It is really not always, a resource that's available in schools or in the community. I don't know Omaha as well as I know the Kansas City area for resources, but a lot of programs here, it can take years to get in on wait lists that help with social skills. I know we have a huge one here called Girls Night Out that people really struggle to get into. And so I'm guessing, that's kind of the case around different areas as well, near where you guys might be located. And so we're really hopeful that today you can learn some strategies that might help in the meantime while waiting for some of those programs, or might even replace some of those programs that you're thinking of. And so today we really, really, really hope you can learn quite a few things. So we want to start by really defining what social skills are, giving a rationale for teaching them. And so we want you to be able to pick skills that you want to teach your kiddo, learn strategies that you can use in order for them to learn them really well and be able to use them in different settings. And then we're going to hop to some tips for school-based support. So it's not only important that you can teach those skills at home, but we want them to use those skills in the places that they're going to need them most. So school-based settings, job-based settings, and things like that. And then we're going to hop into some of the peer conflict stuff. So, how can we identify when peer conflict is happening? How can we prevent peer conflict or bullying, we might say, from happening? And how might we respond and teach some different things to kiddos that are experiencing some of this? And so we hope today you can get some strategies that you can leave with, right after this presentation and say, I'm going to go teach my kid how to do this right now. We hope we can get you some tools to do that. So before we hop into some of the specific strategies, I think it's really important that we kind of set the stage. Social skills are a really, really it's a broad word, right? It's abstract. It's not something that has a really specific meaning. When you think of social skills, you probably think of something different than what I think of when I think of social skills. And there are a lot of different definitions out there to kind of give us some guidance on what these might be. And so the American Psychological Association has their own dictionary of psychology words, and they explain it as a set of learned abilities that enable an individual to interact competently and appropriately in a given social context. Some things that we might pull from this definition that I think are important and kind of a little bit different from some others we might read is that it emphasizes learned abilities. So these aren't strategies that we necessarily are born with in this definition. And also emphasizes the importance of, interacting differently in different social contexts. And so thinking about how we might behave in a library versus how we might behave at recess or out on the playground. The other definition that we have on this page says it's verbal and nonverbal behaviors a person uses to interact with others so that the encounter is mutually beneficial and reinforcing. And so this one is a little bit more specific in my opinion. So instead of just a set of learned abilities, we're talking about really specific verbal and nonverbal behaviors. So speech, eye contact, gestures, body language, all might be thrown into this definition. And then it also adds this kind of different piece that you don't see in any other definitions about it being mutually beneficial for people. And so, not only is it this set of behaviors, but it also is somehow reinforcing or beneficial for the people that are involved in it. Some other definitions, and bear with me, we're going to get through these, but it's a specific class of behaviors that an individual exhibits in order to successfully complete a social task. And this one is even kind of broader than the other ones that we talked about, right? Like what might we include in a class of behaviors? What is a social task? Is that entering a group? Is that making friends? Is that playing a game with other people? And so this leaves things a little bit more broad. And then we have interpersonal responses with operational definitions that allow individuals to adapt through the environment through verbal and nonverbal communication, which I think is one of our more complex, wordy, jargony definitions that we've seen on here, maybe a little bit harder to break down, not a great like layman's definition of social skills or social interactions. But my main point in kind of showing you all of these definitions is that the definitions vary across everyone. Even researchers don't really agree on how we should specifically define what social skills are or what social interactions are. And I think that this brings us to a really important point that social skills are different for everybody. So the way you do something is totally different from the way that I do something. And it's different across every single person. We all have individual differences, how we prefer, what social skills we use, how we interact with people. And those are all things that are kind of going to help you decide, how are we going to teach these skills if everything is so different, if everyone has a different way of interacting. And that's going to be huge when you picking from these strategies. And so I would love for everyone to just take a second, maybe close your eyes if you're feeling it. Pretend that you are attending one of your friends' cookouts. You're going to their house, you've been there for a few hours, you've already had some hot dogs, some burgers, whatever it is you enjoy. And you realize, they're starting to clean up. Most of the people have started to leave. The party's probably coming to an end. You should probably get out of there. How do you leave the cookout? What words do you usually use? What nonverbals do you use? Are there gestures? Are you a hugger? Do you make eye contact with people when you're heading out? There are so many different ways that you can leave a social setting. For me personally, I am probably going to go thank whoever hosted the party. Hey, thanks for inviting me. Hot dogs were great, and I've got to go catch these other things. I've got some other plans tonight, but appreciate it. Can I help you clean up anything? And then I would leave. Other people, and I'm going to make Kate kind of give me what she might do too here soon, but I also know, we're probably, a lot of people listening in, I'm guessing, are from the Midwest or are familiar with the Midwest goodbye, where we say, oh, we've got to go, we're headed out, and then we stay for like another 15 minutes and talk about something else. And then it's like, oh man, it's getting late, I better go. And then we stay for another 15 minutes. Some people like the old Irish goodbye. We just kind of back out of the party without anyone looking. We don't want to bring attention to ourselves. These are all ways that people say goodbye, and they're all totally fine, right? Like they're all options that we can engage in. Kate, what do you usually do when you're leaving a party?
I'm pretty big with nonverbals. So I usually hit them with a wave and say thanks, and I'm out.
Perfect. So Kate's response much different than mine, who I'm guessing is also much different than anyone who is listening in on this call. So I hope you're really able to think about, what's comfortable for Kate is not comfortable for me, and what's comfortable for me is probably not comfortable for Kate. And so keep that in mind when we're teaching social skills, because we want people to feel as comfortable as possible in those different settings, but be able to have some appropriate skills to do those things. I am actually going to pass it off to Kate, who's going to get into the weeds about some of these strategies and other things.
So I think, I really like that Steph did a nice job talking about, I think, the complexities associated with social skills. There's not one clear-cut answer. And so we've kind of highlighted that with the variations in how we might leave a cookout. You thought of the different ways you might do that. So when we think about all of really the endless possibilities associated with social skills, it makes teaching a bit more difficult than it might be to teach something where there's one correct answer, like reading or math. There's, lots of different ways to think about these things, which makes teaching really fun and exciting, but we have to be creative in the way that we do this. And, so before we get into, I think, the different types of ways to teach social skills, let's just back up really quickly and talk about why we need social skills. I think the first things that often come to mind are usually, to make friends, to have relationships, which is true. If we think about the relationship aspect and the connection that has to mental health, there's a lot of research to show that the bigger isolation that one experiences often leads to poorer mental health outcomes. But if we think about it in the context of education, which may not be everyone's first thought, it's really interesting because, again, there's a lot of research supporting this relationship between pro-social skills and academic enablers and academic performance. So thinking about getting higher grades, thinking about performing better on tests. Some of the literature points to this idea of teacher-student relationships. So to break that down, teachers tend to get along better with kids that demonstrate better social skills, which then improves the not only student experience, but the teacher's experience. So it's really important if we think about, education and then how that plays into post-school outcomes, such as, getting into college and then employment opportunities. So the other interesting thing, and I think a lot of work that Steph and I have done related to employment, is thinking about these social skills for the workplace setting. One of the biggest concerns that employers identify is actually related to people's social skills. So what we found is it's pretty easy to teach hard skills. So things, really discrete tasks like answering the phone, how to use the organization system in the office, whatever that might be. But it's a lot harder, going back to kind of what we said, to teach those social skills to employees, or those interpersonal skills. So that's actually one of the things that employers really look for the most when people are coming out and applying for jobs. So if we're thinking about our role in the schools, our role with, teaching kids, social skills should really be at the forefront of what we're teaching students to really prepare them for life outside of K-12 schooling. So Stefan mentioned that social skills are learned. So there's a couple of, different ways to think about this. One of the main ways, and this goes back to a lot of different, it's supported by some different theories, but individuals tend to learn social skills most commonly through observation, meaning they're watching individuals within their environment, such as their peers, siblings, parents, demonstrate or interact with people, and then they simply learn that way. So, I saw that someone said please and thank you, and this worked really well for them. I'm going to go ahead and try that. So through modeling or through observing others model appropriate demonstrations of skills is one way that people just tend to naturalistically learn social skills. But another way is through actually then experiencing those interactions. And so specifically, it's kind of through learning what results of the behavior that you do. So let me break that down. Back to this please and thank you example. If I say to my mom, come home from school, I'm really hungry, great. Mom, give me a snack. She's going to say, excuse me, what did you just say? And so through that, I'm learning, give me a snack, demanding in that tone isn't likely going to result in what I want in terms of getting the snack. So then she might say something like, go ahead and try again. So then I'll say, Mom, can I please have a snack? And that results in, of course, thanks so much for using your manners. Here is some peanut butter crackers. So it's those natural contingencies that you learn based on, basically what happens after you demonstrate a skill or say something in a certain manner. So sometimes we see that that's sufficient enough for learners to demonstrate appropriate social skills. However, when we see that that might not be sufficient enough, that's when we might start thinking about these more direct instruction techniques, which is, really what we're going to focus the rest of our webinar on. And so we can get into what those different instruction strategies might look like. I think, when we think about schools, we think about receiving services through different private practice providers for our social skills. Oftentimes they're using these evidence-based manualized curriculum, which are really, really great. And so I've listed some examples there. That is definitely not an end-all list by any means, but those are some programs with some really, really strong evidence supporting them. And some things that you might see. I know up here, we have a lot of private practices that provide the PEERS program, which has a ton of evidence demonstrating that it's effective to teach social skills for individuals on the spectrum, as well as other developmental disabilities. The things that the research has shown that this is effective for, not only in terms of skill acquisition, but things of improving overall knowledge of social skills and social competence. So through delivering different pre and post tests, and then overall perception of a learner's social skills. So those perceptions may be coming from really invested parties, such as parents and teachers that are really often interacting with the learners receiving the intervention. And so that's kind of, when we say evidence-based, that's really what it means. And that's what's been evaluated within the context of these different manuals. And so those are really great, but we may not have access to that. And so some drawbacks related to these manualized curriculum. One, it's the wait list that Steph kind of referenced. It's having the money to support this. So I know schools often have difficulty with the financial resources that are attached to those manualized curriculum because they're often pretty pricey. And so schools may not purchase that. And something I do want to know is there are, many more curricula out there that may not have an evidence base attached to that. And so schools sometimes may be purchasing those because oftentimes those are much cheaper than these evidence-based ones that I've listed. But so, thinking about that, the other piece is it's a manualized curriculum. And so there's it goes through a sequence of this skill to this skill to this skill, and often only demonstrates one way to demonstrate that social skill. And meaning it's not individualized to the specific kids you're working with. Also, best practices usually support social skills teaching occurring in groups. And if we think about the groups that we're comprising within schools, and I'm in a very rural setting up here in South Dakota, where we often have a lot of different skill abilities and levels within our groups. So the individuals demonstrate a vast variety. So we have kids with a long repertoire of verbal language. So they have really good, solid sentences. But oftentimes, because of the resources we have, we also have a child in that group that may have some more limited verbal language. So something like 1 to 3 word phrases. And so then we have to figure out as facilitators a way to run a group where we adequately address all of these ability levels, which can be challenging with this manualized curriculum, where, like I said, it has this kind of one way to do the skill, and it kind of expects everyone to be at the same level, which can be really draining for parents or teachers that might be implementing these curriculum. Something that I think is really interesting with this is if you look across most of these manualized programs, you often see this key ingredient that comes up across all of this. And the great news is this key ingredient is free, and you can do it without the manualized programs. That's what we're going to talk about a lot today. And you can see on the slide, we kind of hint towards that with the 4 kind of pieces to that ingredient. And so we'll get into that eventually. But first, we want to talk about selecting a skill. And so this is really, really important when we select our social skills. We want to make sure that it's socially meaningful to all invested parties. And so when I say invested parties, what I mean is we're thinking about parents, teachers, the learner, child or student themselves, and peers that may be interacting with our learner. We want to make sure that the social skills are really flexible, meaning that we can use them in a multitude of contexts, and we can use a lot of different variations of that skill. And so we can find ways that, that we're teaching in a really flexible manner and not a really rigid, this is the only way to do the social skill, which again, I think a lot of our curriculum tend to lean towards. And then this last piece, again, getting input from all of those invested parties, thinking about this connection to school. And I know Steph will talk more about this. Something that I like to do a lot when getting input, especially when we're programming with the school, is to think about school rules or the positive behavior support systems that they might have in place. And that's a nice way that we can tie in the skills that we're selecting to what's going to be the most meaningful for them at school. So we'll break this down. So across the meaningful, flexible, and then the input piece. So starting with meaningful, really before we start teaching anything, the first thing we want to teach is, why is this skill important or needed? How is it going to benefit directly our learner, the child receiving the intervention? And then again, this idea of invested parties. So with the skill being important or needed, we need to think about, is this something that's going to help individuals strengthen relationships, start relationships, maintain relationships? And so those relationships, again, can be with adults and peers, siblings, all of those people that they're interacting with frequently. And then how is this going to benefit them long term? And so you want to think both short term and long term in benefits for the learner. I think when we think about social skills teaching historically, something that we might have not done is really done a great job of identifying meaningful social skills. And so what I mean by that is, a lot of times thinking back to like the early literature, between like the 60s and 80s, it's really focused on what directly impacts the adult in the child's life. And although that is super important, it's not the end all and be all, because when we think about learning and teaching, having buy-in is so important from the individual learning. Facilitating different groups. When I was early on in my career, social skills was not a super fun activity for kids to go to. And oftentimes that's because they didn't have a lot of input in deriving what is meaningful to them for their skills. It was show up to something. I know I'm coming here because I usually have a skill deficit. It's something that's typically hard for me to do. I have to now come to the social skills group and I don't want to be here. I don't care about the skills I'm learning. So then think about that impact of motivation and how students are then going to sit through an instruction lesson. Usually it's not great. Usually they're not bought in. So then I spend the entirety of my session trying to increase motivation and we don't even necessarily get to the teaching part. So I think this idea of really selecting something that's meaningful to the learner can help reduce a lot of that resistance to going to like a social skills lesson. And so now we can talk about the flexibility of social skills. So this is a super important aspect to consider when selecting the skill. So we may be selecting, the first thing you want to do is consider multiple options or ways to conduct the skill. As I had mentioned earlier, there's not one universal answer to social skills. Social skills are rooted, social behavior is rooted in culture, knowing, and we know, there's so many different options to appropriately demonstrate a skill. It's not the simple thing as 2 + 2 is always 4 in math. There's lots of ways that I can greet someone. There's lots of ways that I can say goodbye. And so when we're teaching, we want to be really flexible in that option and model and teach those different variations. Again, we want to consider the individual learners' differences and then preferences in what that might look like for them demonstrating the skill. And then be really thoughtful in the way that we talk about this in terms of the social skill can be used across different contexts. So something that I'm really mindful of when I'm, conducting a lot of my social skills teaching is we talk about it in the context of, okay, we're learning this right now in this classroom, and this is something really great to do with your teacher. But we want to also make sure that we're doing this when we get home and we're talking to our parents. This is something that'll make a lot of the adults in our lives really happy. And then we can also do this with like our big brother or big sister or our friends on the playgrounds. And then I can talk about this, I'm going back to this input. And I know, I really want to hone in on this because again, I think this is the way that we can really improve social skills teaching, kind of get it to that next level. So again, ask the learner, ask the child what they're interested in learning. This might be thinking about a big goal that this child might have and then breaking that down. So, let's say I'm working with Johnny and I'm like, what do you really want, Johnny? Johnny is, sixth grader and he's in middle school and he says, I really just want to have some friends. Great. That is awesome. And so what we can do from there is making friends involves a lot of different skills. So then what we can do from there is break that down into a list of different topics or skills and have that student then write preference or order this in a way of like most to least of what they want to learn and start there. Of course, we're getting input from teachers and parents with this, but also including that voice of the learner. And so let's say, they want to make friends. So we might start with something like, okay, great, let's start with introducing yourself or joining a group, because that's the first step to starting a social interaction, which then can lead on to something like finding similar interests, which is a great way to then develop more conversation and then eventually turn that into a relationship. So we can do this through things they self-report. There are different measures out there available if you're having a hard time thinking of different skills to kind of offer. If I was thinking about running this, what I would do is maybe Google some different options of social skills. And then what you can do is really present that as an array or menu of choices for the learner to select from there if they're having a hard time getting started and they may not have a goal right off, the tip of their tongue. So not only in skills selection or the topic area of what you're teaching, but the other thing you really want to think about is this idea of what's comfortable for the individual. So getting back to this idea, I am not a big hugger. So when I think about what's comfortable for me for skills, I would probably, like I said, I lean towards nonverbals or a lot of an appropriate amount of distance between myself and someone having a conversation. So if we're saying, leaving a party, Steph likely is going to give someone a hug and say, thank you so much for inviting me over. That wouldn't feel comfortable to me. And I would just, again, say, thank you so much, wave, and then walk out. Both of those are successful ways to demonstrate leaving a party. So what we want to consider when we're teaching this, instead of me saying the way you have to do this is to give someone a hug and say goodbye. I don't have a lot of buy-in doing that. I'm not really interested in learning that skill. So what I might say is, here are 3 different ways we can do it. I want you to practice each one of these and tell me which one feels the most comfortable for you to leave a party. So go ahead and let's try. Maybe it is giving someone a hug. Maybe it's waving goodbye. Maybe it's going up to them and just saying, thanks so much. I have to get to my next event. So then I would truly have the individual practice this, the learner practice those different options. And then, they would say this, maybe it was, I have to get to another event. That was their favorite. And so that's really what we're going to focus our teaching efforts on. So really be mindful and think about the comfortability of the learner with the various options to learn the skill. So we've talked about a lot of great things leading to this, but how do I actually teach? What's my mechanism of behavior change? And so going back to, like I said, there's key ingredient that was through the different manualized curriculum. Here it is. It's the behavioral skills training procedure, which is, like I said, if you go through Peer's superhero skills streaming, this is the active ingredient across all 3 of those manualized programs. So what behavioral skills training is a teaching procedure that's comprised of 4 different steps that are listed on the slide. The first one is rationale, and so it's really introducing the skills. So it's something like, today we're learning about how to introduce ourselves to others. This is really important because this is a great way to start a conversation with other people and then get to know them better. And so that would be that rationale piece. The next piece is really modeling. So if we go back to the thinking about the way people learn social skills, we embed a modeling component within the teaching procedure. And so what that looks like is there's honestly a multitude of ways to do this. You can use video models. You can use in vivo or live models as the facilitator. Evidence supports really all of those. Videos are great because you can reuse them time and time again, but may be more difficult to obtain when you're thinking about working with kids. And having, that parent permission piece for all of the video models. So then you could always rely on the live or in vivo modeling. And so that's comprised of demonstrating, both an accurate and inaccurate, and we'll get into that more. Then we offer this practice time or this opportunity for students to really rehearse and demonstrate the skill, and then receive feedback based on their demonstration. So, this was, and we'll get into again what all that looks like. So that's just an overview of the 4 steps. So before you start the behavioral skills training, you really want to think about the environment with which you're implementing. So we want to make sure that there's low distractions. I know everyone loves screen time, phone time, but to make sure that individuals are really focused on receiving the intervention, we want to make sure that there's limited distractions within the environment. We really want to start this off in a really positive and excited, engaged manner. We make sure that you develop rapport, and if it's your child, then you are likely already have that. So we want to make sure that it's a fun, basically, environment, and it's not like the dreaded, we're going to go do homework and practice environment. So it's, okay, we're going to get to go practice these things, and this is going to help us make friends. This is going to help us XYZ. Other things to consider, maybe when kids are hungry and or tired, may not be our most optimum time to start social skills teaching at home. So make sure that they're ready to go. Maybe we do snack before we do social skills, just to alleviate all of those concerns, because we want kids to be in a great mood too going to this. Something else to think about is the motivation for doing these skills. And this can be a more complex piece, but we want to think about this idea of why we're not seeing the skill occur all of the time. And so this is going to kind of dictate what our teaching procedure looks like. So with social skills, there's kind of this idea of a can't do or a won't do. And so what I mean by that with this can't do piece is with social skills, a can't do would really mean that you've never seen your kid demonstrate whatever social skill really in correct manner ever. And so what that tells us is that this behavioral skills teaching procedure that we're talking about is going to be a really great option for then teaching those skills and giving these kids the tools to demonstrate that skill. But another consideration is this idea of, so we said can't do, so then there's this idea of the won't do. And so what that means is maybe you've seen your kid demonstrate the social skill, but you don't see it all the time, and you only see it sometimes. And so what that tells us is it may be more motivation based. So they might know how to demonstrate the skill, but for whatever reason aren't motivated to do that 100% of the time. So then if it's something in that realm, behavioral skills training may not be the best option. And so something you want to think about then is how can we increase motivation to really demonstrate those skills at optimal times? And so that might be through, a bunch of different ways, through providing different reinforcers based on the amount of times they demonstrate the skill, things of that nature. But I just want you to think about those different things before you jump into this full behavioral skills teaching piece that takes, may not be the most optimum. And then the other piece is, really be mindful of your own emotions prior to starting a teaching lesson. If you're ramped up or if you feel a lot of different frustrations, that's likely going to come out within the teaching. So we want to make sure that we're in a great headspace. And so we're excited to be there. We're excited to teach these social skills so we can really offer this safe and supportive and positive environment. All right, so now I'll break this down. And I'll go through this because I know Steph has some really great things to talk about with school-based stuff. Okay, so first piece, rationale. We'll introduce the skill. And so, like I said, that's really, let's talk about introducing ourselves. This is super important because this is a great way we get to know someone, we can develop a friendship. And so this might look like, I walk up, I'm within 3 to 6 feet of the person I want to talk to. And I might say something like, hey, how's it going? If you're in the Midwest. So then we would model. And so I've talked about the differences with video and in vivo or live modeling, and that's all great. So I do want to note that we tend to do both an inaccurate and accurate demonstration. And so you might be like, that's weird. Why would we teach the wrong way to do a skill? And so how we typically start a session is through an inaccurate demonstration. And so what this does is really provide this distinction for the learner to see what we're going for and then what we're not going for. And so it's really for like this awareness training piece for the learner. And so then, we'll demonstrate an inaccurate model, say, great, how do you think that went? Is this based on the steps we just talked about? And they might say, I don't think so, or give us a thumbs down because it wasn't what we just talked about. And you'd say, great. And then they get to identify the specific steps that were not correct for the skill. And then, of course, we would follow up with an accurate because we want to always leave an accurate model, the last thing kind of in their little brains before they have the opportunity to practice. And so again, those are different options of video modeling. And, the research supports that all of these are really effective. There's not one that's typically better than the other. So it's really just kind of user preference in this regard. So then it's this rehearse piece. So practice, practice, practice. What that would be is, okay, Johnny, it's your turn to introduce yourself to the group. Or, if a consideration, if kiddos are more shy, what I do is then just have them practice one-on-one, usually with me instead of the whole group. And then we work our way up to interacting with the group. But, I would say, so then they practice and I'd say, that was a really, really nice job. And always start with pointing out what they did right or what was correct. And so we want to say, yep, you did a really, really nice job going up and saying, hey, how's it going? But you were kind of looking at your feet. So then think about it, you would introduce maybe the skill steps that they might have missed and then, say, but no worries, we get to practice again. So think about it in terms of the compliment sandwich, essentially. So start with something positive, then provide our feedback for something that may have not been demonstrated in the way that you had taught, and then follow up with encouragement for trying again. And so that's really the feedback. So I've already beat you to that slide. Okay, so now we'll just do a quick little live demo for y'all. Steph will be our learner. So today we're talking about ending a conversation and saying goodbye. So we really selected this based on all those good things we talked about. So through interviewing different invested parties, as well as Steph herself, because she had indicated that she wasn't getting invited to as many parties lately. And, she's like, I don't really know why. And then through further conversations with others, found that she had a hard time leaving parties, which then the natural result was people weren't inviting her as much. And she said she wanted to be invited to parties. Great. So Steph, today we're talking about how to end a conversation and leave a party. This is really important because sometimes people get tired of talking, and it's really important for us to look at clues so we don't overstay our welcome and we keep getting invited to parties and we can still maintain friendships. So a really great way we can do this is, I'm feeling really tired. I think it's time for me to go home. So then we'll go ahead and practice. So Steph, why don't you show me how you might leave a party?
Okay, so it looks like you're cleaning up the hot dogs and stuff from the party. Oh my gosh, are you tired? I've had a really long week too. I mean, I went to this event this week. It had all of these people at it. We were going to like dances, and then we went over to have you been to the new restaurant down the road? It's got some like this really good cheese dip. Oh my gosh, it was delicious. You have to try it. You should have got the cheese dip for the party. How come you didn't think about next time? I'll bring it.
So you did such a nice job noticing that I felt tired. I did feel tired, but remember that we really want to make sure that when we see someone feels tired, that's where we're going to say something like, maybe it's time for me to leave the party. So that's why I want you to think in your head. And then from there, you can say something to the effect of, oh, I see that you're really tired. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Thanks so much for having me over. And so
Okay.
we would go through and practice that. And then something that I didn't do is provide all of our steps for the skill. And so it'd really be identify. So back up when we introduce the skill, ending a conversation or leaving a party, we want to look for clues, basically that it's time to go. So some things to consider is if everyone's gone from the party, if they're cleaning up, if the host looks tired. That's usually a good insight for you to leave the party. And so what you would do is go over to the host, say you have to leave, provide a reason for leaving, and then say goodbye. And then we would go on there. And so
we can, sorry, Kate, I'm going to pop in real quick. We can go through, we just pulled some video models from YouTube that we found. And this is something super easy that you could do at home too, is just kind of Google whatever skill you're looking for and see if you can find something that's already created. No need to spend extra time reinventing the wheelhouse, thinking of things when the internet has basically everything. So I am just going to quickly play what our inaccurate and accurate models might have been if we were to do this.
You've given them all the hints, like commenting on the time.
Can you guys believe it's 11 p.m. already?
I got nowhere to be.
Over the top yawning.
This would be a bad model, right? No, what's happening here is that one guy seems super tired. He's not interested in having people at his house anymore to host the party. And then, the other people don't pick up on those cues. They continue to eat, snack, drink, whatever they're doing. And so we would talk about those things if we were to look at the model, and then we can pop to
how to say bye to friends.
When you're leaving a place where your friends are at, you want to say bye to them. It is respectful.
If you don't, it's confusing them. And also, don't be mean about it.
When you're leaving a place where your friends are at, you want to say bye, like this. 1, 2, 3, bye. Let's practice together. 1, 2, 3, bye. Let's try again. 1, 2, 3, bye. One more time. 1, 2, 3, bye.
Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, bye. 1, 2, 3, bye.
So I think some things that when we're watching these videos to think about is that the first inaccurate video probably wouldn't be the best for a younger kiddo, right? Because we're looking at adults that are engaging in a social interaction. If you have a younger kid, I wouldn't pick adults doing the interaction as your best model. You might want to pick kiddos who are around their same age that are doing them. Something that also is nice about videos is that what types of skills do we want them to use? Can we show them multiple examples? Is there just one that we want them to watch? That way they have a variety of options to choose from. They've watched kids do it in multiple settings. Anything we can do to program them to use the skill outside of where they were taught it is going to be better. And so now, sorry, we're going to pivot pretty hard here. You've learned all of those strategies, which are awesome, great, wonderful, but we don't want them to just use them at home with you. We want these skills to happen at school, at jobs, in the community, wherever else. So this has considerations for school, but you can really think of it probably a little more broadly as I'm talking through things as well. Ask your school district, are there social skills that they're doing at school? Social skills groups aren't just for kids who have an IEP or who have a disability and are recognized by that at school. They're also for kids who are typically developing. I need help with social skills sometimes. I know that Kate needs help with social skills sometimes. And so it's a natural thing. Think about when you go to a new place or you're meeting new people. Is that something that makes you a little bit nervous or uncomfortable? You might feel better practicing what that's going to look like before you have to go through that. Think about job interviews. We practice, we do mock interviews and things like that. So everyone can benefit from some sort of teaching for social skills. These are typically led by speech language pathologists, counselors, school psychologists who are pretty well trained in these things. I think the best thing about getting, some social skills training at school is that those are kids that your kid is going to interact with the most. That's where they're going to need those skills the most in their life is where all the kids are. And then think about extracurricular activities. Pick activities that kids are interested in, especially teens. Let them go get involved in some of these other things. The more opportunities they have to watch other people interact in settings, the better off they are. Because like we said, social interactions are also learned through observation and interactions. If you have an IEP, consider adding a goal around social skills. We had talked about how important social skills are for academic outcomes, not only to build relationships with teachers, which can then promote, other outcomes in school as well, helps build friendships, maintain relationships, can help with employment, a whole host of different things. And so this skill is going to be an important one that your kiddo is going to need. So you can always request an IEP meeting and talk about, hey, like we are thinking about adding a social goal. The social goal would be important for our kiddo because they have a hard time with greeting other people, introducing themselves to other people, and we want them to be able to have friends to be successful once they get older. Our kiddo has told us these similar things. Let's all get on the same page here. And so when you go in and you're like, let's add a social goal, I feel like a lot of the times what happens is you see on IEPs that Johnny will improve his social skills. What on earth does that mean? And I hope you're thinking the same thing, because after we just talked about those definitions in the beginning, we know social skills is a really broad term and it doesn't really mean a whole lot across people. And so we want that social skill or that social goal to be specific. What social skill are you working on? What does that skill look like? Is it initiating a conversation? We don't want a broad skill like we'll make new friends. What on earth does that mean? How can I observe that? We want things that are measurable. How are they going to collect data on this social skill? Are they looking at specific steps? Are we looking at certain interactions or frequency of them using the skill? And we want the goal to be attainable. I think it's super important to think about, Kate had mentioned earlier, what if the goal is to make friends? But that's not something that they're ready for yet. They don't have some of those foundational skills in order to get to that step. So maybe we need to start with the basics. Can they, be an appropriate distance from their speaker while they're talking? Do they have a good tone of voice, volume? Can people hear what they're saying? Those nonverbal skills are kind of your foundation. And so if we don't have those, that might be those first things that we work on before we make bigger goals, like initiating a conversation, responding to a conversation. And we want them to be relevant. Pick something that's meaningful to that kiddo. That's the big word that I think of when I think of relevant, is like, is that something that's really going to benefit them? Is that something that makes sense? It's going to help them not only in the short term, but also in the long term. And time-based is that last piece we want. So, is this going to be a goal that we work for quarterly? Is this something that we want to review every 4 weeks? Let's make sure that we've got a limit on when this goal is going to be achieved, because we want to make changes to that goal if it's not being achieved so that they can make progress. There are so many resources online. Use that little thing in your hands, your phone, your handheld device to search all over the internet for goal setting. There are hundreds more than what I've provided up here. These are ones after my quick search that I thought would be helpful for you guys. The first one is National Association of Special Education Teachers. You're going to find, and you can see kind of in the hyperlink here, that a lot of the goals are going to say for autism, for kids with an IEP with autism. These goals are not just for kids with autism. And when I show you the next slide of examples, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, my kid could use that help too, or this kid could use that help too. It doesn't have to be a kiddo with a disability or an IEP. And then the other website is the Nebraska Department of Education Office of Special Education. Actually, I think what's really nice is a lot of states have their own examples of goals for all different types of things, math, reading, writing, but also for social behaviors. And so go look at your states and see if they've got some examples on there that you can pull from, at least to get you an idea and to get your mind going and thoughts about what goals might be helpful for your kiddo. And so this I have literally screenshotted from one of those websites because I thought it would just be helpful for you to see what this kind of looks like. When I first read it, I was like, oh no, this isn't a great resource, because looking at that first line, it says they'll develop social understanding skills. what does that mean? And then when you look down at each of these specific steps, it gets a little bit more specific. So in this first example, they'll raise their hand and wait to be called on before talking out loud. That's a really specific skill that I would guarantee every single kid, and especially in like a kindergarten classroom, would really benefit from, and even in high school. We'll work cooperatively with peers and small groups. And they even have some examples of some specific behaviors they want them to be able to do, like sharing materials, allowing other people to share their own thoughts or opinions, developing an understanding of the relationship between what they say and their affect on others. That's more like a perspective taking skill. And when you're reading through these, you might think, that's still kind of broad. And I'm glad you're thinking that if you are, because you can make it as specific as you want. Maybe you want to break down this into they will share materials or turn tick a couple times. But I just wanted to show, generally, they've got a specific behavior here listed. They have it time limited. Hopefully they're relevant based on the kiddo that they're working with and meaningful for them, and that they're things that are going to help them long term, which all of these things seem like things that would help someone build friendships and do better in the classroom. How can we monitor progress towards the things that we're teaching our kiddo? How can we make sure that what we're doing at home is going to school too? Or how can we make sure that what we're doing at school is also going to home? We can kind of collect some data or set up some reward systems. So we know automatically generalization is really hard for kiddos, especially kiddos who are on the spectrum. It's really hard to take a skill you learn in one setting and use it in another. So we can implement a couple different things to try to get kids to use things. What we might use is something like, a frequency count. How many times did you use the skill throughout the day? And they might have, something as simple as a sticky note or a little tiny notepad that says, I used the skill initiating a conversation. And it might have even steps that they like to use to initiate conversation on it. And then they can fill in a bubble every single time they do it. So, I did it once, I'm going to fill in my star. Did it a second time today, fill in my star. And when they get home, if they use their skill, 3 or 4 times out of 5 possible opportunities, or they filled in all their bubbles, then they get a reward. And that might be something as simple as they get a little bit of extra time to do something. They get, some free time. They get a piece of candy, a sticker, or, whatever rewards work for your kids and are motivating. That way they're encouraged to continue to use the skill. We could also use a rating of how well they did the skill. So maybe, they did 2 of the 5 steps, so they get a bunch of stars. They get 2 steps for each time they, do 2 steps of the skill. But what's I think most important about this is that we have to reinforce the skill always. And so social skills don't always come natural to everyone. We want them to be motivated to do them. And so at times we are gonna have to find some external motivation, like a reward, to get them using the skill a little bit more often. All right, I'm kind of going to do a segue into peer conflict, which actually aligns, I think, really well with what we've talked about already. And so hopefully you'll kind of be able to pick up on what I'm throwing down. But we're going to go through some background information first, talk about some prevention methods, and then just some general strategies that might be helpful for navigating some of these difficulties. You'll see that I kind of use the term bullying and peer conflict interchangeably as we're talking about things. You might see things a little bit differently in terms of how you might define each of those words, but I think overall this will capture both sides of that. So some background info. Peer conflict and bullying is most present in middle school, which surprised me, to be honest. I was thinking high school, but this is when we start seeing some changes to kiddos, when they start growing up, they get introduced to more things. And so that is when bullying and peer conflict is the most present. It can happen anywhere. I think about specifically those unstructured places that have a little bit less supervision, the hallway, the bathroom, the bus. And now, since it's everywhere, is online. So, things on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, all of that stuff all comes into play now with conflict. And we can serve as different roles in part of this. And so don't just think about someone who is, instigating the conflict or instigating the bullying, but think about all of those other roles involved. So witnesses, people who just watch it happen, which we might also call bystanders. Defenders, so people who kind of stand up for the kids who are being bullied or for the other people who are engaging in conflict. And assistants, so not just the main, instigator there, but the person who's also kind of egging them on or helping them with some of those things. And keep in mind, depending on your kiddo, they might not be able to communicate with you when this is happening. And so it could be really hard for you to identify when someone is experiencing peer conflict or bullying just based on what their skills are. They also might just not be comfortable sharing it because they're afraid of the repercussions or what could come from it. You're going to go tell the teacher, who's going to tell the parent, who's going to tell the kid, and then the kid is going to come and retaliate. There's all of these different, things that we should think about when it comes to how kids might communicate that this is happening to us. And so I've provided kind of some warning signs that might, kind of hint you into something is going on. When I'm reading these, you'll probably think, that doesn't necessarily mean it's peer conflict or bullying, which is true, but it probably means something is going on. And so it's definitely some things you want to clue into. Unexplainable injuries, if they come home and suddenly they don't have their books, their electronics, jewelry, something's missing. Complaining of headaches, stomach aches, pretending like they don't want to go to school that often like they used to, changes in eating habits, difficulty sleeping, grades are going down, suddenly, they don't feel like doing schoolwork that they used to like to do. They suddenly don't want to go to social situations that they liked. If you have a kid who used to get invited to birthday parties and has a birthday party coming up and loves to go to them and suddenly says, I don't really want to go to this one, something's going on. Feelings of helplessness, decreased self-esteem, and then even self-destructive behaviors like running away, harming themselves, or talking about suicide. When these things happen, we want to know, we want to get involved. We want to kind of tease these things apart and figure out what's going on so we can help them. And so I think first and foremost, right, we don't want our kids to ever experience these things. But when they do, we want them to be prepared for when it does. Because like Kate has talked about, and we've talked about most of this time, is that social behavior is learned. And so if we haven't watched this happen to someone and learned that way, or we haven't interacted and had this interaction ourselves to know how to respond, we aren't going to know automatically how to engage in a behavior to get out of the situation, or what's appropriate, or what to do, or how to respond. And so talk about it. Have a plan before it ever happens. You can model some really good positive social behaviors. How do you manage stress? How do you manage conflict with other people? Kids are watching always. Even when you think they're not, or you think they're not clued in, or you're like, nah, they don't understand what's going on. They do. They are smart. They are, they pick up on a lot of stuff that we think that they don't. And encourage kids to do what they like. I feel like this is a really nice protective factor. Getting kids involved in their interests, encouraging the things that they like to do so that they can meet other people who have similar interests, creates a protective factor because it builds more friends, it builds confidence, it builds up their self-esteem so that if something like this were to happen, they've got kind of a support system or a fallback or something in place. And keep communication open. I had talked about, kids might not feel comfortable communicating some of these things because they're afraid of what could come next. Kids might just not know how to communicate these things. And so modeling that and showing them that it's okay to share that with you is going to be important. And so some strategies. There are tons of online resources. Like I had said earlier, stopbullying.gov has an incredible amount of information. There are specific, plans there that's like you can download an online form that talks you through how you can talk with your kiddo about this stuff. Ask your school about what their plan is, because I think what the main goal here, right, is that there are social skills we can engage in that probably can eliminate potential for peer conflict. So if kids are good at, building friendships and starting conversations, ending conversations, recognizing other people's social cues, it could be less likely that they get themselves put in this situation. So first and foremost, let's teach those really positive pro-social behaviors to give them some protective factors. And then we can use those same strategies Kate and I talked about, that behavioral skills training, rationale, model, practice, feedback, to go through how to respond when this happens. And the reason why I have highlighted, ask your school about their plan is because I would hate for you to teach your kid a full plan on how to respond when bullying happens and your school to have a separate thing that they're teaching your kid. So we want everyone to be on the same page. I want them to be able to find, whatever that trusted adult is that they want to go tell or that they need to go tell about bullying, and have like a really safe plan that's approved by both the school and you. Because what happens if you told your kid, when this happens, you need to go find this person and tell them, and then that person doesn't do anything about it? The kid's not going to want to use that skill anymore to go tell people because nothing happened or nothing changed. And so then we just kind of have this cycle of other things that could be going on that kind of make the conflict happen even more. So make sure that you all have a good solid plan of how this is going to work. So in conclusion, peer conflict, really let's treat it the same as the social skill stuff, right? Let's give them some good positive pro-social behaviors that are protective against conflict and bullying. Let's give them some strategies for when that does happen, how we're going to respond, who we're going to tell. Let's practice it using that behavioral skills training. That way they are used to it, they've rehearsed it, they know what's going on, they have a comfortable way for them, right? Because they might not want to go up and tell an adult, but maybe they can write it down on something. Or maybe they have like a code word that they like to use, something along those lines for them to be able to report to a trusted adult and keep everyone on the same page. Those are going to be the main points there for some of that peer conflict. Caitlin, we have saved a few questions towards the end that people had sent in. Do you want us to kind of power through those? And then if you have anything from the chat?
Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, it sounds like you already maybe have some on your slides.
Yes, we do.
Beautiful. Okay, sounds good. I can just read the question and then you can respond with however you all want to respond. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. All right. So yes, we did get some really awesome questions that came in when people registered. So that's what some of these are. But our first question is, what methods are the best for easy data collection?
Yeah, I'll take this one, Kate. So I had kind of mentioned this earlier, so hopefully it kind of helps that we went back to some of those slides. But there are some quick and dirty ways you can do it. You can do a frequency count of how often they're using the skill just to get them using it in other settings. We can use a rating that says, we did it from like sad face to super happy face, right? How well did you use the skill? What qualities did it look like? Maybe you only collect data in one setting for a while or at one specific day or time of the week. That way you're not overwhelmed with, tracking every single point of data that they're doing. I think really just getting kind of like a plan in place on the front end is going to also eliminate any stress that parents or teachers have about collecting this data. So that way materials are ready, any data collection form is done, a self-monitoring form even is going to be easy for kids to use themselves and kind of convinces them to use the skill too.
Awesome. And I think something too that is okay is that sometimes your data collection method can change. Like maybe we just want to have them increase the amount of times they're approaching somebody to introduce themselves. So maybe that's where we're doing the frequency count. But then maybe once they have that down, maybe then we want to focus on the quality of that, going from the super sad face to the super happy face. So I think being flexible too with the data collection can be really helpful as we're developing the skills.
Definitely.
Awesome. All right, next question. How do we assist with generalization of skills taught at school or therapy to home or a real life context?
Yes. Another one I think we talked about quite a bit towards the end there. So I hope maybe that answered this question. But, think about how you're going to keep communication in flow between school and therapy. Knowing what skills are being covered, what those skills look like specifically is going to be really important. So that way you can, prompt your kid to use it in those other settings. You can, let teachers know, hey, we worked on this in therapy. If you see it at school, can you help him track it on this little sheet that he has? And then that way everyone is on the same page. They know what skills we're looking for. They know what the skill looks like, and we're tracking it in some way.
Awesome. Thank you. Question 3. How do we teach social skills without requiring masking of individuals, maybe with neurodevelopmental disabilities like autism?
Yeah. I think that's the question at the forefront of every day, right? This is like a hot topic, probably one that kind of even seems scary to address on our end, right? But I think it goes really back to the slide, and Kate, I think, really hammered this home about how are we selecting skills? Are we picking skills that are meaningful for the person? Are they giving input on this? We want them to say, hey, these are the skills I want to work on because I want to be able to do this. And then we find a plan for how to meet those goals that they have. We don't ever expect someone to change or be uncomfortable in these scenarios. We talked about test driving different steps. You know, do you like it this way? Do you like to do this? Social interactions are so nuanced. There's so many ways we can do the same thing that's still appropriate. And I think that as long as we are working cohesively with the individual, making sure that everyone kind of gets a say, input in the party, then it, I think, kind of breaks this barrier down, or kind of, kind of helps us get rid of, what is kind of at the forefront of the conversations. And I think we haven't done that historically, right? We have always said, here's a manual, here are the 5 steps to do it or don't. Like, it's like these like dichotomous things, or that like you do it or you don't. And that's not the way social interaction is. And that's the way that we should be kind of looking at things going forward.
I mean, I was really like, we just going back to the historical, like we've taught it, and this is the only right way to do this. I think like even going back to this idea of eye contact, we've broken it down so explicitly within the behavior analytic literature that said things like you have to make eye contact for 3 to 5 seconds, or it doesn't count at all. It's like, first of all, I don't think I'm making that much eye contact like on a day-to-day basis. And then what is eye contact? As long as you're orienting and looking towards like the individual that you're talking to. So I often teach like I tell my kids it's like the little like cheat or hack to eye contact is look at their forehead, like look right up here. That way it can alleviate that uncomfortableness that some individuals may feel by making direct eye contact, but just looking that direction and meeting the need of, I think, what's sufficient for the social interaction. And so I think, again, just that flexibility piece and figuring out what is comfortable, but still sufficient. And that's the beauty of social skills. There's so much room to figure that out. And there's lots of different options. So I think that's great. So I think that's really how I've gone about addressing this in my own social skills teaching practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's so many things besides eye contact. We use eye contact to show we're listening, right? Yeah. But I can show you that I'm listening by nodding my head. I can show you that I'm listening by not playing or like fidgeting with other stuff at my like desk or whatever I'm doing. Like, we just have to stop thinking in these like this is this and this is this, and think about how social behavior is all different, and there's a lot of ways to show what the goal is of each interaction.
And I'll add too that sometimes, like when we're practicing a new social skill, it's going to be exhausting, which is kind of that masking feeling. Like I'm masking so much that now I feel exhausted by the end of the day. And so also working with the child to kind of figure out like, who do I feel like I could be like my truest, most authentic self? Who can I like just unmask like at the end of the day? Especially as I'm learning these new skills and they're going to feel exhausting. But I think you all brought up such good points of like finding the hacks, as well as like being sure that we're working on skills that are actually meaningful, and that we're not just forcing people into social skills that many of us don't even really engage in a lot of the times.
Yes, definitely. Okay.
All right. So how do I resolve disputes between me and my child about what behaviors are considered socially appropriate? I love this question.
So I can take this one, Steph. I think the first thing I want to say is peer-to-peer interactions look much different than adult-to-peer interactions. We're adults, so we can remember what was cool back in the day when we were in 3rd grade. But at the end of the day, we are still, 20, 30 something adults. We're simply just not doing what's cool or appropriate for like what peers would be doing. So I think we have to remind ourselves that. And so think about the context in which they're using these social skills, right? Is this something that they should be doing on the playground that is going to, you as an adult might think this is silly or goofy? And think about middle school behavior, right? I think we could say a lot of middle school behavior is silly or goofy. We were all like that when we were in middle school, but reminding ourselves about that. And so we might not say that's something that I want to see from you, but being lenient and understanding that may be the social norm or the cool thing within the middle school environment. So taking a step back and remembering like, okay, yep, they are a preteen and they're going to do some silly things. And so the ultimate kind of thing that I think about when I'm teaching is really, is it hurting someone? Is it offensive to someone? And then if it's not, have some flexibility and leniency in what they're doing. But then also I think having that conversation with, yep, that's cool to do with your friends at school at recess or during PE or after school. But, you know, when we're around grandparents or when we're around teachers or adults or parents, like there's some different things that we might have to do. So kind of having that compromise piece. And then of course, when you're having those conversations, really be mindful of the way you're having conversations with your kid so that it doesn't turn argumentative. So you really want to be mindful of having like a neutral tone and not being, you know, really heightened when you're having it, even though some things that middle schoolers do can be really annoying. Take a deep breath and then just like, okay, it's cool. Like, yep, I did that. And, you know, I think approach it from that angle.
Agree.
Yeah, such good advice. All right. Do you have any specific ideas for helping autistic teenagers with depression?
So I think this is interesting. If you look at the overall literature, so we've had a lot of cases come in, you know, where we've been delineating between depression or autism or whatever it might be, but our treatment plans often have some similar components in them or the recommendations that we're making through our evals. And so a lot of that is this idea of coping skills, which then oftentimes translate to social skills. So things that we do to cope through like things that we might be learning through like CBT, often lend itself really well to this idea of social skills. And so going back to this idea of generalization that we've talked about throughout the webinar today is really how can we do this across settings. So I think that's really helpful. And then the way that we might be teaching, just to make sure that we're doing this in a way that the learner is, you know, receptive to, essentially. So are we teaching in a way that they understand? And so that might be making this a little bit more concrete than some of the CBT manuals might have. So to give specific examples and like, this is what this might look like. And then again, just promoting that generalization across, I think can be really helpful. And then things to think about, because all of that, what it does, hopefully, is then increase that motivation to engage in these pro-social behaviors. So coping skills and social skills.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to think about how can we take the skills that we're learning, such as social skills, to kind of help with some of those mood concerns, or are by teaching these skills, are they able to more effectively engage with other people, which then might help with some of the mood. I think that's such an important point. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Kate. Awesome. Okay, we have one last question. My child started middle school and sits alone at lunch and is not able to find others to play with at recess. What would help?
So that's a great question. And I think that's something that, you know, I've experienced quite a bit with the kids that I've worked with over the years. That's been a pretty common referral concern. So the way that I kind of approach this from a teaching standpoint is to really think about things that the kids that I'm working with really like, and then finding those things in common with other people. So really finding similar interests is really one of those foundational skills to develop friendships, right? Like think about the people that you're friends with. Usually we have something in common. And so then how can we find that? And so find different kids that, you know, may have similar interests. And so that could be different clubs or activities. I think, you know, something that's interesting is this idea of video games, and the social component that's there is kind of a really nice way to bridge those things, you know, of course, with parental supervision, all those great things at the video games, but to really kind of like start, break the ice of finding similar interests. Another thing to think about with like school considerations is if your child does have an IEP, creating social goals that are specific for that. And so something that, you know, I've used a lot in the schools is really like this idea of a peer buddy that can kind of, maybe that peer buddy doesn't necessarily have the same interests, but it's someone that's really interested in helping other kids at school. And so then what they can do is maybe set those introductions for kids that have similar interests, to, find something to do at recess or lunch and have things to talk about, because it makes it much easier, again, once there's something in common.
I agree. I also think about, does your kiddo have the skills to interact with other kids? Do we need to teach them those explicitly, like what we talked about today? Or is it something that, we just need to motivate them to be able to do, just like Kate said, with a common interest? So, yeah.
And I think, you start the whole process with what we've said the whole time: sit down and talk to your kid. They might have expressed some things like, I can't sit with anyone, or, I'm having a hard time at lunch, and then, probe further. So, tell me what it looks like when you went to go sit down at lunch and what happened. Tell me what you might have noticed from your peers and what they might have done to help kind of delineate what the best next steps might be.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the youth or students that I work with, when we're talking about kind of like figuring out who do you sit with at lunch, how do you like approach like a group of kids who are maybe already playing Foursquare or like basketball. And something that just I've learned from the students that I work with has been like looking at their t-shirts and being like, okay, like, is that a band that I like? Or is that like a video game or a reference to a book that I really like? And seeing like if they can find some of those common interests without having to first approach them and kind of figure out like, hey, do you like video games too? There's already that natural bridge.
Yeah.
That's been something that I feel like a lot of kids that I've been working with have found to be really helpful.
That's a great tip. That's like going to be my new hot tip for people.
Awesome. Kate, Steph, this was such awesome content, and I found it to be super helpful as a practitioner, and I'm super excited to share this with a lot of the parents that I work with. So individuals who have registered, you'll be receiving a survey with feedback on your experience with today's webinar. So please complete it. But thank you so much for attending. And we're looking forward to hearing from you all. Kate, Steph, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.